Hi, this is Harsha Venkatesh from Dwight Funds. I want to talk about a very interesting book today. It's called The Tycoons, written by Charles Morris. It talks about four very important entrepreneurs of late 1800s and early 1900s in the US, based in the US. So these were some of the people who you would call as doyens of their industries. So I'll tell you who those four people are, which Morris talks about. It is Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J. Gould, and J.P. Morgan. So before I come to these four specific individuals the book talks about, one of the things which is very fascinating is during the 1860s, when US went through the Civil War. US had a civil war from 1860 to 1865. So that is when a lot of the groundwork was laid by Abraham Lincoln during that time, who was the president of the United States, to make US a superpower, which is today. So one of the rules which he had come up with was something called as the Homestead Act of 1862, where they gave out to any budding farmer, any budding entrepreneur, around 160 acres of land for a grand total of $20. So they called $12 as the registration fee, $6 as the facilitation fee, and $2 for miscellaneous expenses. For like $20, you're buying 160 acres of land. So what this enabled is for people to buy farmland, buy tracts of land where they did farming, animal husbandry, so on and so forth, into the in the eastern side of the US. So you could US is a vast country which was not populated all that well. So immigrants could come in, they could pay this fee, they could become farmers, they could become small entrepreneurs. And then you had all those goods brought into the east side, in New York or Washington, so on. And then they can either go into manufactured industries or they can be exported out. So this was the main thesis. So with this, after the Civil War of 1865, a lot of the industries started getting developed. So America started becoming industrialized. And Morris talks about these four people: Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, as well as J. Gould. I'll briefly talk about these guys. And I would highly recommend you to see what were those ingredients which made America so successful today, that was set in the period of around 150 years back. So talking about Andrew Carnegie was the guy who built the steel empire. So he was the guy who had run the largest steel company. By the time, I think in the early 1900s, when he sold his company, Carnegie Steel, which eventually became the US Steel, which is even today a listed company in the US, he sold it for a grand total of $480 million, probably 125 years back. So you can imagine how big of a deal it was during that time. So he started out as an Irish immigrant into the US. He started doing odd jobs, and then he worked under Tom Scott, who was in the telegram business, and later he found opportunities in manufacturing steel. So he took that up, he took opportunities, he bought every damn technology out there, the greatest technologies which came in, he bought those. He was not the guy who invented them, but he adopted that at scale. That's how he succeeded. The second industry which I will talk about is from John D. Rockefeller, that is the oil. So the war for oil, what you see, all started because of the initial oil exploration, which started in the US during the 1860s. And again, John D. Rockefeller was not someone who came from a rich family. He did not have any family connections. He was just a very bright, young individual entrepreneur who saw an opportunity in consolidating these different oil fields, which were springing up during the 1860s and 1870s into this giant conglomerate, which was called as Standard Oil. And that's how he made the money. And he, at one point of time, during the late 1800s, 1890s, even early 1900s, he was like 90% of the entire US oil production and probably 75% of the world oil production. So John D. Rockefeller's strategy was very simple. He was the guy who adopted the best technology out there for oil production. He built up scale, and he totally bought anyone else who was competing out there. So if anyone else had a competing oil field, he will go and he will show them his books, and he will basically tell him that either you join me, you sell your company to me, or I'm going to destroy you by reducing the price. So that's how he consolidated the entire oil industry in the US by late 1800s, 1890s, 1895s. So he was controlling roughly around 90% of the oil production in the US. So he was termed as the first billionaire in the world. By 1900s, I think his personal net worth was over $1 billion. In 1910s, the US government had to constitute an anti-monopoly law which broke Standard Oil into, I think, around 20 or 30 different companies. The Chevron, the Exxon, all the big oil companies are basically companies which were broken into pieces from Standard Oil. These are all the offshoots of the original Standard Oil. The third one is Jay Gould. So Jay Gould was, in a sense, the guy who was least educated out of all these people, of the four people I will talk about now. Basically, he was a guy who started out his entire career in the business of tannery, that is making leather goods. So he was working in that particular industry, and he saw an opportunity to become a financier in New York. Again, this is during the time of the US Civil War, where he came in and he saw an opportunity, and he started financing various railroads. So you had all these railroads which were connecting far off places, because as I said, the Homestead Act of 1862 enabled people to buy large farmlands for very cheap prices. But if you're manufacturing something or if you're building anything, you had to transport all of that to centers where people used to stay. And during those days, it used to be the east coast of the US. So you had all these large railroads being built, and they were being financed by various different players. And Jay Gould found an opportunity to consolidate this particular railroad industry, and that's how he made money. So during the 1880s, so he was one of the richest people in the US looking at exploiting this particular industry. The last guy is a financier called JP Morgan. So you would have heard of JP Morgan because JP Morgan name lives on in some of the companies he had built in the 1870s, 1880s. JP Morgan was the guy who financed all types of industries, right from railroads, steel, oil, coal. Any major industry was typically financed by some of the larger financiers in the US, and the biggest of them was JP Morgan. He got a break in the late 1880s when his father, J.S. Morgan, he basically gave him enough experience to go and learn from the British financiers. You know, the Barings, the Rothschilds of the world in London. He got training there. He came back to the US and he started the entire, you would call the financing business in the US, which we see today. So he was the guy who started that. It's very fascinating. The reason why I thought I should bring this up is 150 years back, some of the things which these four industry captains did in the US, I feel that a lot more budding entrepreneurs are doing similar things in various different industries in a country like India today. So I'm very hopeful that we will see some of the guys come up and become industry captains. But I would like to leave you off with this thought that it's not usually education, or it's not even like family connections which make you rich. It's basically applying yourself in something which interests you and making sure that you go very deep in that. So that is what I would take away as a big lesson from reading the Tycoons. So until next video, I will say bye, and I would highly recommend you to buy this and read this for yourself. Thank you.